Welcome to Realms Unknown, a sci-fi and fantasy podcast brought to you by The Bugle. You feel it in your fillings. That was the right set of hieroglyphics. The swinging axes settle themselves back into the walls, and the door to the library opens. You step in. On your right is a tall, bleak woman in black robes and oversized reading glasses so artistically jazzed up and plasticky they could almost trick you into thinking she has a personality. Amanda, librarian and curator of echoes. She looks less solid than other people, a rumor you're hearing about a woman. Faint before and after images of her movements halo her, and you immediately start having a migraine. You look away quickly, absorbing the architecture of the Hall of Whispers. It's vast, arcing up towards the sky, but it feels completely unreal, as though it were a painting or a set. It takes you a minute to realize this is an artifact of the bespelled floor of Suck. The floor took 100 years and 1,000 screams to build, and it has just two jobs. It takes its work very seriously. The first job is that it consumes sound, the sound of your footsteps the moment you make them, the shuffle of papers, the creaking of shelves, all gone. Its second job is to be a floor, which is to say stable underfoot, and it manages that pretty well about 80% of the time. The librarians are willing to take the cost in human lives lost screaming to a silent void as the price of... On your left, opposite Amanda, is Sebulon, a cheerful-looking man smiling at you with very white, very sharp teeth that it takes you a moment to realize are all just one jagged zigzag tooth. He radiates benevolence and gestures to a little bubble around him and a sign on it that reads, "Sound booth, come ask your questions here." You look right to Amanda. She offers a chalkboard and a piece of chalk. The label on the chalkboard reads, "Inquiries, complaints, join the conversation. The library values your feedback." The font is Comic Sans. There is a smiley face. It feels sarcastic. Choose, brave adventurer. If you choose to A, talk to Sebulon, please turn to page 642. B, write on Amanda's chalkboard, turn to page 700. C, turn around and flee the library, turn to page 320. D, walk forward onto the silent, probably floor of the library hall and turn yourself to Realms Unknown. Yeah, that's right. This is Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by The Bugle, in which we discuss science fiction and fantasy. I'm your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the sorry traveller you died to my decision to drink that potion, the flipping back to try again to my strictly obey the rules of the game, the dungeon to my dragon. It's Joz Norris. Welcome.
Hello. That was great. 700 pages in that Choose Your Own Adventure, but at least.
Oh yeah, and I wrote all of them.
Right. How did you choose which one you were going to read out on the podcast?
Which small extract.
Thousands of other entries.
I just flipped through the book and whatever.
Yeah. What's your favourite ending?
That might be a hint. Well, you'll have to find out. Our subgenre deep dive for the day is obviously Choose Your Own Adventure. A, choose your own adventure, or B, text in science fiction fantasy where you choose your own adventure. And also, did you know this podcast is a visual feast for your ravenous eyes? We are on YouTube via the Bugle channel, and you could subscribe to the Bugle channel on there and on your podcast feeds for all Bugle shows. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, did you know it also comes in purely audio podcast form? So depending on how much of this information you want coming in via your eyeballs, that is an adventure you can choose. And to find ways you can support this and other Bugle podcasts, you can go to thebuglepodcast.com/donate. News! A new Stargate show has been commissioned by Amazon. Isn't that exciting?
Whoa.
Did you ever watch Stargate?
I watched the original Stargate film, because it was a film, right? Where the Egyptian gods were aliens and they go through a portal in a pyramid. And I remember loving that film. And I haven't really kept up with it or thought about it in a while. But it came up the other day. Do you know the Born Sexy Yesterday trope? That video essay about supreme cosmic beings that are born in the bodies of sexy adult women.
Yes.
And it brought up Stargate as a particularly kind of troubling instance of it. But I don't know. I can't remember whether that's the original film or something that happened in the many TV series. But I loved the film.
Oh, it was so beloved. I've definitely seen the film.
Are you a big fan?
No, I definitely saw the film, and I watched some of the series with my brother at a point, so I have sort of fond memories of us watching it as teenagers. It's one of those things where when these things get commissioned, you never know if they're going to be made. But Martin Gero, who created the show originally, will be helming it as the executive producer and showrunner, and there's a bunch of other people who were in the original thing who've been signed. It will be in the same universe, canon, with the same tone, but it won't be a reboot, which I feel is hopeful. If you're gonna be doing something with the same intellectual
Right.
property, it ought to at least be something original, I feel.
Yeah, something that sort of moves forwards. Are they gonna do the legacy sequel thing of, like, this old man's here to die and pass on some wisdom to some new popular cast members that are currently kind of on the up? Are they gonna do that thing? I
Yeah,
love it when they do that.
and all the important people are their children, thereby perpetuating the Nepo
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah, yeah. Like, have you seen the Naked Gun reboot? Not reboot, the legacy sequel.
No, I've
It's a
not.
lot better than I expected it to be, and it has a lovely gag of every single cast member being the child of all the dead cast members from the original film, so they have photos of Leslie Nielsen and all the other cast on the walls, and they all cry looking at them. It's great. It's very silly.
I love that. Yeah, I have seen so little, in the last 4 years, but one day I'll
Oh,
be
yeah, of
allowed to
course.
watch them all again.
Yeah. What was the premise of Stargate?
Oh, it was that there was a gate to the stars. It was just a portal thing.
That was it, yeah.
There's American
Great.
military science experiment portal, but then, villain of the week, lots of fun, sort of a very
Nice.
buttoned up military man and the, sort of, anthropologist with long hair and their kind of tension,
Cool.
and then there was the alien who was also a big stern man. It was fun.
Was it always Egyptians, or was that just the first movie? Because I remember that was all about Egyptian gods.
No, it was not always Egyptians.
Shame, that was my favourite thing about the movie. I loved that aspect. In which case, I don't care about this Stargate reboot unless it's got Egyptian gods in it. Not interested.
If you like Egyptian gods as aliens,
Oh, yeah.
slash alternate
Yes,
universe,
please.
Egyptian gods, you will like James Islington's The Will of the Many slash The Strength of the Few, the second book being The Strength of the Few,
Ooh.
which is our other piece of news, which Sony has just landed the rights for that.
Whoa. Both the bits of news are about things that relate to Egyptian gods as aliens. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Something in the water.
Yeah, I looked at a pyramid for too long today, and that's all the news I'm interested in.
Yeah, that'll do it.
And that brings us to our first section. Joz, what have you been putting in your brains in the science fiction and fantasy realm of late?
I have been playing a lot of because I feel like the main way that I sort of engage with fantasy these days is mostly through games. I sort of read it a lot as a kid, and then these days games is the big way that I sort of do it. But I've been playing a lot of a board game called Spirit Island. Do you know Spirit Island?
I don't.
It's a really good sort of cooperative game, so you can play it with friends. Although I am banned from playing it with friends because it's too complicated. My girlfriend says that she can't play it anymore because there's too much mental arithmetic to keep track of. But you can play it on your own, which is great. You can sort of simulate friends and kind of pretend that you have company and play sort of four-handed against yourself. But the idea is that it's set on a sort of a Pacific island in the 16th, 17th century, and some invaders have come to this island to colonize and to kind of like drive out the indigenous population, build towns, burn the land, and you play as a combination of sort of spirits that live on the island that control the elements. So you can play as the lightning, or you can play as the river, or you can play as a volcano, or you can play as the ocean. And whichever one you choose to play as sort of completely changes the way the game plays. So essentially, you can kind of endlessly variate. Is variate a word?
No.
But whichever kind of elements of the game you focus on completely like change the way you play. And because it's so complicated, it sort of means you can never exhaust it. It's one of those ones where you go like, okay, this land has 3 defense currently, but these invaders do +1 damage on this turn because of this event card. But you have 3 water elements here and 2 earth, so you've unlocked the next threshold of this power. So it's perfect for my brain because I just always want to make things more and more complicated. But I have learned that nobody wants to play it. So I've been having a great time just sitting on my own, filling the time. I love it. Do you ever have time to play those kind of things? I guess not with kids, right?
I wish I did, and it never sort of occurred to me really before because I find it very stressful playing games because I feel an immediate sense of responsibility to my avatar not to let them down with my lack of skill. And
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
very ashamed and guilty if I do something stupid in the game and get them killed. Um, and so it's genuinely quite bad for my like, I get very upset
Yeah,
about
I
it.
know what you mean. I feel like as well because this one has. I think the guy who invented it played so many. He was sort of like, why are so many board games built around the concept of like colonialism, like Risk, and all these other games that are basically about like conquest is good. So he really wanted to make an anti-colonial board game, which means that when you win, it does feel great. But there is there's the inherent kind of like guilt and sadness of like, oh, I let my character down, and then the extra layer of like, oh, and I've also kind of facilitated the extermination of like indigenous peoples. So it's quite bleak when you get it wrong, and because it's so complicated, it's quite easy to get it wrong. It's very easy to just go, it again. But great fun when you do it right.
That does sound like a lot of fun. Yeah, I think it's a thing that I need to get stuck into in my to-do list slash bucket list of things that I think I would enjoy. So this week I read The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson, which I really liked. It has a super fascinating premise where in chapter one you meet a character who is condemned to a dreadful fate by a combination of a couple of bad people and our central character. So the entire journey of our central character is under the shadow of them having done something basically unforgivable.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they don't get away with from it. That like there's no like redemption of it necessarily. It was like you made this bad decision for the wrong reasons to advance your career. You advanced your career, and like all of these consequences play out, and there's no real redemption from it.
Wow.
It's only the first book so far. Maybe they will turn around, but I found that a really interesting premise.
Are they sort of likable despite it? Like after the initial decision, are they a likable lead, or do you just spend the whole book being like, I hate this guy?
No, you're on her side,
Right.
but even though she is described as very unlikable by the characters around her, she's not very well
Right.
liked. In part because she did do this unforgivable thing. Yeah, she is the eponymous Raven scholar, and her one of her character traits, which I quite enjoy, a real character flaw. She just can't not explain something if she knows what's true. So she's a scholar,
Oh,
like she's a
great.
pedant,
Yeah, yeah,
and so
yeah.
if she's like, she just cannot
Yeah.
resist saying, "No, actually,
I'll
you're
stop you
wrong."
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
people
yeah.
like that.
Which is, yeah,
That's
a really
great. I love an
fun.
unlikable character like that. I feel like there's such a kind of drive to like. I read All Fours this year by Miranda July and loved it, absolutely loved it, and identified so much with like the main character's kind of outlook on stuff. And then read so many reviews on it where people were like, "She was horrible. She was a monster. I don't know why anyone would ever be like this, and I don't want to read about unpleasant people like this." But I sort of feel like if you write just very honestly about people that are difficult or flawed or tricky in various ways, I find that so much more exciting to read because I'm like, oh yeah, good. I have felt like this ever, and I think it's more fun to see that.
Yeah, there's an odd kind of tendency in literary criticism and reading, and particularly in book talk, that you want every story to have its morals on their face. That
Mm,
the good people do good things and the bad people do bad things, and you know, it's very old fashioned in a lot of
yeah.
ways. So I really enjoy it when you're kind of getting grit. And I had this question actually in my writers meeting this morning. I do these Zoom writers meetings for my Patreon, and somebody was like, "I wrote this terrible character doing a terrible thing, and it made me feel, like, awful and sick inside to even put myself in the shoes of
Oh wow.
the villain." I was like, for
Yeah.
me, that's a really interesting technical exercise of, like, no one thinks they're the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you get to the point where you're like, "Well, this
Yeah. So if
is."
you could try and think your way into that place.
Yeah, that to me is an interesting intellectual exercise and probably why I am a villain.
Yeah. Is
All
she
I've
part
ever wanted to
Raven?
be is a villain in an action movie. No, they have the 8 who are the 8 animal, gods who have returned 7 times to save humanity, but the 8th time that they come, they will destroy the world.
Right.
And, whether they get summoned or not is a question. And so each person at the age of 16 promises themselves to one of these figures. You have the monkey god, who's the patron of the arts and performance, the fox god, who's the patron of sort of trickiness and spies,
Ah,
and assassins and unpredictability and ADHD type characteristics.
Yeah.
The raven is the god of scholars, and the tiger is the god of like rich people,
Right.
and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's a genuinely fun world, and I really enjoyed it. And the other thing, I did a bit of a reread of the King's Watch series by Mark Hayden, starting with the 13th Witch, who is he's an old RAF pilot and gangster, and he becomes a part of the wizardly CIA or wizardly MI5. That's a very brief summary, but it's a lot of fun. He gets approached by a mysterious stranger who says, "I'm Odin, and I want to be your patron, and I'm gonna make you magic." And he's like, "This seems like a terrible idea."
I'd immediately sign up to that. If somebody offered to be my
Yeah.
patron, I'd just be like, yeah, great. I don't care what the strings are with this. This will be useful. Especially if it's Odin.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I've been into, and I can definitely
They
recommend
sound
both
great.
of those things, but I can't wait for the next book in the Raven Scholar series because it's really fun. And that brings us to your ad section. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. Do you feel like things are about to come crashing down around your ears? Not sure if your next decision will be your last? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Irony-Onomy-ometer, a combination weather vane and textual beat analyzer that can tell you with 62% certainty whether you're about to do something incredibly stupid. By assessing how much exposition has been happening, the distribution of trope ions in your narrative energy field, and now with world-leading Derivatron derivativeness eye roller, you can be much more than coin-flippingly secure in your actions. Sure, 62% accuracy doesn't seem like that much, but when you're having to decide between three guards who cannot lie, the Irony-Onomy-ometer could just be the difference between you and death. Terms and conditions apply. May cause sweating and erectile dysfunction. No returns for spike pit death. If you're in an American story, ask your insurer if they cover the Irony-Onomy-ometer. We could rule this world, you and I. Just pick me up. Feel that power. What's one little soul between friends? Is your sword talking to you? Has your axe suddenly started seducing you to the dark? Don't chop your own head off in despair just yet. You may be dealing with a Class 4 egomaniacal artifact. Before you commit to a path of darkness or hurl yourself into the chasm of despair, talk to a specialist at the Artifact Abuse Helpline. Our compassionate, mind-shielded counselors are here to listen 24/7. You are not alone. Call 1733 not evil. Help is just a crystal ball away. Now it's time for Trope on a Rope. Every week, Joz Norris, we talk about a trope that we love or we hate, or we love to hate or we hate to love, but we notice it anytime we see it. Do you have a trope on a rope for us this week?
I do. So this one again is sort of like specifically something that I notice a lot in the subgenre that we're diving into later, but I think applies across a lot of fantasy in general. So we're talking about choose your own adventure later on, and a thing I notice a lot is shops and shopkeepers, because I find that very often in that genre you'll be exploring a sort of a generic dungeon, and there'll be a lot of, do you go left or right? Do you open this door? Do you open that door? And you'll go through the first door and there'll be a troll, and you have to kill the troll and take some gold. You go through the next door, there's a giant spider, you have to kill the spider, take its egg to make a potion or whatever. And then you'll go through the next door and there's a guy in there who goes, hi, I'm a shopkeeper and I sell adventuring equipment to passing adventurers. And I always read that and I'm like, what? How are you making any business out of this? How are you making enough money to like cover the commercial rent on this like dungeon space? And I feel like it sort of crops up a lot, especially in like fantasy gaming, where the only shops that you can go into always sell basically like swords, ropes, potions, spell books, and that's it. And I often find myself in these worlds being like, where do you go if you want to buy like an egg or some fabric or anything just normal? Because the entire economy seems built just on the concept of questing. Like you're either going on a quest or you're selling equipment to facilitate a quest. And I just don't know how the economy of these worlds work. I know that this guy's making his money from me buying swords and ropes off him, and I know that I'm making my money by murdering people and taking their gold, and I don't really understand what else, that like where the economic activity comes from. Because you wander around and you see other people and you see other kind of like seemingly businesses, but you don't seem to be able to partake in them at all. And I always find that really funny.
I mean, that is very funny. It's possible that you've just inevitably been routed through the sort of adventure sales quadrant. Like, there's a place of the part
That's
of
true.
Sydney City where it's like Paddy Pallans and like Adventurer World, and it's all just selling you tents and crampons and things, and it's the middle of the city. But actually, if you turn left, Chinatown is right there, and you can get a bao bun.
Great.
So maybe it's just that you've never turned that left.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose particularly in the kind of the printed word, in the world of a choose your own adventure, but the idea of writing a whole extra set of entries that are like, if you would actually just like to go shopping and like get your food order in, then you can do this. But really, like, I would rather not write that out. So can we assume that you're not interested in that? But I would prefer it if they were more thorough.
It's 5:30 PM on the second Friday of the month. It's the night noodle markets
Yeah,
nearby. What
I'd like that. I'd love it if you could just wander around more.
are you sure when you say what you want from a game that it isn't just to go outside?
Yeah, maybe actually, yeah. I'm saying, oh, God, it'd be nice if it was just a bit like real life, wasn't it?
Ah.
But yeah, I love shopkeepers that whose business just seems to be baffling. It makes no sense to me of like, who's buying all this stuff? How many people do you get wandering through this ruined castle being like, oh yeah, I could do with a healing potion actually. And the desperate, I like imagining the desperation of these guys where they're like, God, I've not had a customer in months because I opened my shop in an underground dungeon where loads of trolls live. So the idea of me coming in, he must be like, oh my God, someone's here. This is great. This is so good.
I'm a franchisee. How am I gonna pay
Yeah.
Central with a spider egg?
Yeah.
My trope on a rope for this week is not wildly dissimilar. It's in a
Oh yeah.
similar universe to yours. It's mysterious strangers giving away maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my experience, the only people who give away maps are people working at information centers or on hotel desks. But in the Adventureland, it's a mysterious stranger who gives you a map, not of the place you're in with the cinemas circled in biro and the bus route, but of a different place that you're not at. You need a map to find where the map is of where you're at.
Also, always the assumption that when somebody gives you a map out of nowhere, the immediate thing to do is go to the place on the map, which I don't think I would immediately join those dots. If I went outside and somebody gave me a map, I wouldn't be like, well, I'll go there because I've got stuff on.
Yeah.
Like, I might consider it further down the line. I'll be like, okay, in a couple of months, maybe I'll go to this place I've been given a map for. But even then, like, I think it's a stretch to assume that you just go there immediately.
And also, in fact, sometimes if somebody gives you a map, you think, "Oh, well, I don't need to go there now. I know what it looks like."
Yeah, I have a map of it.
Like if you read A
Yeah.
Lonely Planet just for the fun of it, never
Yeah.
intending to go, just like, "Oh, cool, now I know where I would have a sandwich if I went
Yeah.
there."
God, the number of quests we've missed out on by just thinking we were doing our research.
Tragedy. And that brings us to our subgenre deep dive for this week. Our subgenre deep dive is Choose Your Own Adventure, the format whereby you pick the path through the narrative. Very tricky for authors to have a satisfying narrative arc because you have to play out a number of different options. It invites cheating and going back in time. I'm going to start by recommending the live action Choose Your Own Adventure show by John Robertson, which is called The Dark Room, where it's sort of played by the audience or as a whole or by members of the audience. And it plays out on all of the tropes of the classic text-based computer game Choose Your Own Adventure explorations, where it is extremely easy to die at all times, and it's performed very well by John Robertson at high volume.
Such a great show. Yeah.
As always, it's so much fun. That's my first recommendation. Do you have any recommendations?
My big sort of recommendation, because I like Choose Your Own Adventure books were sort of my gateway into fantasy a little bit as a kid. There was like a secondhand bookshop that we sometimes went to in this town. There's a town called Hay-on-Wye in Wales that we would go to on holiday every now and again. And they had like a room full of the old fighting fantasy Choose Your Own Adventure books, which were sort of the first like attempt at doing it, I think, at like putting them down as like printed things. And so I used to buy another one of those every time I went and got very into it and then kind of got into fantasy off the back of it. And then got rid of all my collection just before I went to uni because I was like, these are a bit silly now. They're a bit childish. I'll take them to a charity shop. And then during lockdown, remembered them and was like, I used to love those things. And I bet that would be quite a fun like hobby to get back into while we're all trapped at home not being able to do anything, and found out that since I'd gotten rid of my whole collection for free, they had become collector's items. And now, like, some of them go for like £300. There's a couple of really rare ones that go for a lot of money. Not the ones I had, but I did spend a lot trying to get my own collection back and play them again. And I think they're just a really good kind of like entryway into that genre. I think most of them are very, very simple. They're sort of like aimed at kids, and it is just, do you go left, do you go right? But as you get further through the series, I think they had other writers that came in that really did try to experiment with the storytelling of it and sort of go, how do we do something a bit more interesting than just, you have to defeat this evil wizard, you are an anonymous adventurer, find a sword, find a potion, kill him, job's done. And you started to get some that were more kind of like innovative in the way they told a story in a non-linear way. So yeah, that whole series, the Fighting Fantasy series, I think is a great kind of like overall primer for like what you can do with the genre, like going from very, very simple to like starting to be more complicated. They're great fun. They're very stupid. They're very, very stupid. You have to be kind of like aiming for a bit of a kind of like retro childhood nostalgia sort of experience if you're going into it, but they are a lot of fun.
Well, I will tell you something very stupid, which is the first Choose Your Own Adventure book that I ever read. I didn't realize that's what it was, and I wasn't
Oh,
quite
right.
sure on how to play the game. So I sort of thought what you meant to do was to read it from front to back and hold all the
Right.
possible threads in your head. Um,
Wow.
and I found it
Must have been
very
exhausting.
stressful. Yeah, and I was like, "Why do people enjoy these? They're
Yeah.
terrible." Because it felt sort of really wasteful to me that there would be a path of the story that you just didn't read.
Yeah.
Like, that you just would walk around that part of the story and the author would have written it for nothing. What? So I thought first I thought you had to read it linearly, and then I thought you had to go through and then iterate through every pathway, of the story.
So he was sort of reading it like a, I don't know, like a 60s postmodernist kind of weird cut up thing. Like, have you read any B.S. Johnson, The Untouchables? He
Yeah,
wrote that book in a
exactly.
box where you can read it in any order and you have to hold all the different thoughts in your head. You were reading it like that, like some
Yep.
sort of modern masterpiece.
No one told it didn't have a page of instructions
Did
on
it
how to
not?
read it. It was just
That's
the one that
mad.
I read was just from the library, so it was just I
Right.
just started reading it, and then I was like, "What is what is happening?"
Yeah, that sounds
This is
exhausting.
this is very avant-garde for whatever I was, 11-year-old. So it took me a while to really get au fait with the genre. By the way, if this is your subgenre, if this is something that you really love, head over to the Blue Sky and over to my Patreon, patreon.com/Alice Fraser. You can subscribe there for free. And every week we do the call out for the subgenre deep dive, and we just get a cascade of incredible recommendations. So if this is the reading list you want to go into, there will be more of a deep dive than we could possibly touch on in the length of a podcast of just fantastic recommendations in all different genres. One that came up a couple of times was Bandersnatch, the Black Mirror episode that
Yeah,
went
I've
up
not
on
seen that.
Netflix. It was taken down by Netflix because apparently it took a lot to host it because
Right,
you gave you the option of going through it. But it has been put back up by fans, so you
great.
can still play it online. And it makes me think, a pretty early pioneer in having a second person, having you be in the book, a thing which is now very much critiqued and present in the romantasy trend coming out
Oh,
of
yeah.
fan fiction self-inserts. So it feels
Yeah,
like it's maybe a prequel or a predecessor to that desire to be in
yeah.
the story.
Do you know about Lit RPG? Have you ever read about this?
I mean, did I recommend Dungeon Crawler Carl to everybody very highly early on in this podcast? Yes, I did.
I didn't really know what it was, and so my girlfriend's brother is writing a lit RPG online, and I read a bit of it, and I thought because I've played a lot of like choose your own adventure things, I would understand how it works, but it's baffling to me. It's crazy. It's so interesting, but it's like, because the idea is that you read it like it's a novel, right? But then every now and again it will go, his strength stat was this, and he needed to get it up, so he went and killed this enemy. In fact, so it's as though there's a game being played, but you're not playing. It's like happening to somebody else. Is that right?
It is basically I mean, we did a whole episode on this. You can go back and
Yeah,
listen,
yeah.
but
I must
I
find
recommend
that
it as
one.
an entry point. Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's a very good entry point for the genre. And it's very funny as well. But basically, what happened was you had fantasy novels, and then people
Mhm.
wanted to be in the fantasy novels, and you had various attempts at that, which were Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
roleplay type games, board games,
Yeah.
choose your own adventure
Yeah,
novels,
game books
and
and
then
things.
online games and these kind of more modern computer versions of the games where you are the avatar. But then that became people's first point of contact with fantasy as a world, as a genre, and
Mhm.
so when they were imagining themselves in a fantasy world, they were imagining themselves in the fantasy world as a player,
Yeah, and in a game system,
and
yeah.
what it would feel like to be in a game system and to power up and to be collecting all the items and to have a clear mission in a way that the characters in fantasy novels don't actually realize that they're leveling up and
Yeah,
acquiring
yeah.
skills. The author just presents them with the challenges that then give them the additional skills. So that kind of what would it be like to be the video game avatar is the question that these people are asking themselves and are answering with these
That's so
with RPG.
interesting.
It's so fun.
'Cause I always find, like, the thing I really enjoy about those, like, solo player kind of role-playing book type things is the idea of, like, being able to choose your way through it. So I found it so interesting that, like, people would read about something that's not happening to them, but still with the mechanics of it. But that makes so much sense that, yeah, if your way into the genre is in a sort of a gaming sense, then that's a format that would be really, like, satisfying to read a story in as well, if that's your kind of way of approaching it.
Yeah, if you're
I get it.
fantasizing about what that would feel like, yeah. And then
Yeah.
there's a question as to whether things like Groundhog Day or those iterative, time travel
Yeah.
loop games are sort of a choose your own adventure where they're just iterating through the different stories the way I did.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
you're sort of presented with infinite number of opportunities to do something, and you keep repeating and finding your way through. Because I think that's another thing with those, like, with those games of the idea of having to have a hard reset every time and go right back to the beginning is such a frustrating experience. But then also the feeling of like, well, I'll just keep my finger in this bit of the book and then flick ahead and then flick back if I made the wrong choice inherently sort of feels like, oh, well, I'm not playing it properly. So yeah, I find that any of these books that has like an innovative solution to that problem where like you don't want to just completely like start all over again, but you also don't want to have that feeling that you're cheating. I think it's really interesting when they try and kind of solve that in a way that feels satisfying.
Yeah, very tricky. Do you have any other recommendations before we move on, Joz?
There's a great series that I've just finished called Vulcanverse, which was made, but it was written by Dave Morris and Jamie Thomson, and it's based on Greek myths, which I also like loved growing up. So it's really nice sort of being in that world. And the idea is that you're in a sort of a version of the world of Greek myth where everything has kind of fallen apart and all the gods have gone to sleep. And you wander around, and there's sort of nothing to do. It's like an open world book. It's done across 5 books, and you can kind of travel anywhere and in any order, and it's really interesting the way they kind of capture that sense of, in a video game, like you'll wander around and explore and you won't know what to do, but you'll gradually piece it together. And I think they found a really interesting solution to how to make that work in a book where when you first explore, you will just find that nothing reacts to you being there because you don't have any of the right code words and things. But then eventually you'll go off and complete a mission somewhere else that means you meet somebody. And then if you go back to this desert where nothing happened earlier on, then suddenly it will respond differently, and that person will be there and will then help you work out how to turn the river back on and then get the city kind of like thriving again. So the whole premise of it is that you go around this sort of like Greek myth inspired world and gradually restore like the forest and restore the desert and then bring life back to the place. But it's really well designed in terms of actually like working like a story, so the whole thing starts to kind of interconnect and relate to each other, but you're sort of just thrown in at the deep end of like wander around this place, see what happens. Uh, and I've heard from his, because I went on his website because there wasn't much about it that I could find online, and I got very stuck. So I tried to find stuff out, and I found that apparently it hasn't had huge kind of numbers of like take up at the moment. There aren't a huge number of reviews or whatever. So if people feel like they would enjoy that kind of thing, then I think it deserves it. I think it's a really sort of innovative series.
That does sound like a lot of fun. I'm gonna go into my, Patreon comments. People have been recommended quite a few people have been recommending Ryan North, saying that he's a
Oh
modern
yeah.
day whiz of the genre. Eric Logan says he
Ooh.
started with the retellings of Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and slash or Juliet was his version of that. And he won a Hugo Award this year for his Choosable Path graphic novel, Warp Your Own Way, set in the world of
Oh
Star Trek
cool.
Lower Decks. And he also did a Choosable Path Squirrel Girl issue, according to Randall Cooper over in the Patreon comments section. It's all going off there. That brings us, unfortunately enough, Joz Norris, to the minds of
Ugh.
is where we talk about something that we used to love, but maybe now looking back makes us feel a little bit oh. Do you have anything from the minds of for us?
I do. I've decided to talk about, and this isn't for the sort of obvious reason, because I feel like when I read about this section, it feels like the thing I was looking for was for something that's become very problematic when you look at it this way. And I couldn't think of loads of things that I loved as a kid that have dated in that way. But I'm going to talk about Spider-Man because it is something that I loved as a kid that now when I think about, I feel depressed. Largely just because of like what the rise of like comic book movies have done. Because essentially, like, I loved Spider-Man as a kid, and I loved Marvel Comics, and I loved the Fantastic Four, and I felt like one of the things that I really loved about that world of comic book storytelling was the idea that they're kind of like parables for introverted nerds who don't fit in very well. There's sort of like a wish fulfillment element to it of like, imagine if you had these amazing powers, you could do all these amazing things, but it wouldn't solve all your problems, and you would still struggle with this and this and this. And I sort of loved that aspect of it, that they kind of got introverted people kind of felt seen by it. And I think it's great that they have become as popular as they have, except that now the whole kind of like Marvel Cinematic Universe thing, I feel like the way it's influenced filmmaking is just a bit of a shame because they're so corporate and they're so kind of like designed by committee as a product. And all of them feel like the main focus is like the bottom line of the corporations making them. And then meanwhile, everything's become so IP obsessed and it's so much harder to tell original stories. And every film costs 200 million or something. And you could make literally like 50 interesting small films for the same budget. So yeah, whenever I think about how much I loved those stories as a kid, I feel it's a real shame that now the big impact they've had is that it's so much harder to tell original, innovative, like weird stories that weird people will kind of take to in the same way. I feel like they've become quite bland, and that's a bit of a shame. Do you like them? The sort of like the comic book movie takeover?
Well, I mean, I no, not really, but I mean, I
Yeah.
think the nature of the comic book itself was that it can be made quite cheaply, and so
Yeah.
you can have all of these iterations and the kind of nests of internal, rebooting and everyone dying and being
Yeah,
reborn,
yeah.
and the kind of the fan fiction of itself, the sort of
Yeah.
choose your own adventure. You want this kind of Wolverine, so you're going to go
Yeah.
to this title with this author, and there is a sort of an element where it's a shared folklore. There's something
Mm.
folkloric about it, and often they are using folklore figures and, playing with them. There's sort of an action figure game element to it for the writers and the artists.
Yeah. And frequently like quite weird stories and weird kind of like things that they choose to explore with it. And I just feel like a lot of that doesn't survive into the very sort of like corporatized version of it becoming a mega franchise.
Well, it's sort of like everyone liked something a little bit different about those superheroes or those superhero worlds, and by
Yeah.
sticking them all together and trying to find something that everyone will like the same about them, you lose
Mm.
the thing about them that was actually interesting.
Yeah.
That you could have a comic book title where Superman is a Nazi and
Yeah.
see what that well, like, see what that world looks like, or where, Batman is more or less corporate, or any number of possibilities. So, yeah, I think, yeah, that is a shame, and that does go into the minds of, my minds have dug up, Robert Howard's Conan stories from the
Oh
early
yeah.
1930s. I read them at my grandmother's house when I was younger. My uncle Rob had them in his shelves, and they were so fun and so exciting and so bold and so sort of alluring to the young version of me that was reading them. And in retrospect, there's a lot of like what would have been called scientific racism
Right.
about what types of people are good at types of stuff.
Okay.
Um, which as a child, I don't think, ever occurred to me was a thing, sort of all fantastical and fantasy world. I don't think I thought of it as having implications for the real
Mm.
world or making an argument that hit the real world. So, like, they're set in a divergent timeline, but there's various things that have happened similarly in history. But for example, the lore posits that the Egyptian pharaohs were actually Aryan Scandinavians
Right.
in that universe. So he's not saying that they actually were Aryan Scandinavians, but he is
Okay.
sort of
But
saying,
his
wouldn't it
version
be
of it is
better if
yeah.
history were such that Aryan Scandinavians had built the pyramids? Because then I wouldn't have to feel weird about it or something. There's something a
Yeah.
little bit like, I don't, it's just a bit,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
still such a fun artifact that I do still recommend going and finding them if you bump into them, having it have a flip through, but do be prepared to be like, "Oh, that's ooh."
Yeah.
I think even at its time, it would have raised some eyebrows.
I feel like there's such a default for fantasy kind of like particularly when I was growing up, like the kinds of fantasy that you like found easily as a kid in the 90s or whatever. It all tends towards such a kind of like white European lens that you don't even notice the ways in which you'll look back at it and go like, oh, this assumes so much about what the culture of the person reading it is. And then any kind of encounters with other cultures are inherently kind of like exoticized in some way.
Well, I have 2 advantages in that. First of all, I'm almost entirely uncritical when I'm engaging with a work of art. While
Hmm.
I can think about it afterwards with a critical lens, but while I'm engaging with something, unless it's truly dreadful
Yeah.
or very, very good, I am sort of just swept away by it. You know, I'm just in the story
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
like, "Well, that was so much fun," and then afterwards I'm like, "Wait a minute, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I'm,
Yeah.
100% okay with it." So I get to enjoy them, and also I think, particularly when it comes to growing up reading fantasy in the 90s and of the 80s and 70s even,
Mm.
um, from the old books at my grandmother's house, which was a lot of my entry into the genre. I feel very lucky that I am sort of, I have low gender self like, I don't really see myself when I'm reading a book as anything other than the protagonist. I'm not looking at the
Yeah.
women in those 70s books and being like, "Well, they
Yeah,
don't
hang on.
respect me." I'm like,
Yeah.
"I'm the big man in this story." I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
put myself into the protagonist's shoes, and it's not until later or many years later that I'm like, "Oh, that's I mean, that lady's just around to put one boob on his head. Why why is she there?" I do think it makes me a fortunate person because I get to enjoy the thing before I then realize that I probably shouldn't have enjoyed it.
Yeah. But I think that's nice. I think you can't always sort of force things to read them through that sort of way of looking at things if there was like some pure enjoyment to be had there in the context through which it was written. But there is
Yeah.
stuff that you look at later and you go, yeah, wait a minute.
Yeah. As we rise out of the minds of there's a reminder to subscribe to the Bugle channel on wherever you are sourcing this. And all the books that we discuss here are in our affiliate store. There's a link in the show notes. And should you choose, dear listener, in your further adventures, if you fancy a strategic cooperative game that involves too much mental arithmetics for your loved ones, consider having a lovely time on your own playing the board game Spirit Island, where you can defend your island home from colonizing invaders, play as the lightning, a river, a volcano, or the ocean. Almost endless amounts of fun to be had playing solo or with others. If you're after an entry point into the choose your own adventure genre, of course, try revisiting the Fighting Fantasy collection on your bookshelf or spend your hard earned cash rebuying it. Remember, you can choose your own adventure, unless the adventure you choose, like me, is reading every page of the book one after the other and trying to remember your way through it. Or try reading any of the books in the open world game book series Vulcanverse, which takes place in a Greco Roman world. In each case, you play through your childhood with your choices in those early years shaping the character you become. Much like Joz's Spirit Island recommendation, there's a nature protection element. You can restore the forest or the desert. Good, wholesome fun to be had. Joz, that brings us to the end of the episode. Do you have anything you want to plug?
I'm going on tour in January. I did a show in Edinburgh this year called You Wait, Time Passes, in which I finally unveiled my life's work.
It was so good.
Thank you so much. And that's going on tour around the UK from January through to June. Very long tour, very big gaps in the tour. Quite sporadic, but it's coming to a bunch of cities around the UK. So if you go on my website, joznorris.co.uk, you can see where it's coming to. And if it's near you, then please come on down. I'd love to see you there.
Excellent. If you are at a loss between Christmas and my birthday, the 7th of January, I'm running my annual creative reboot boot camp. We do it's just to get you into good habits rolling into the new year. I don't do New Year's resolutions, but this is a nice way to, like, every day meet up. We have a little workshop, do some exercises. You can give half an hour of your day to it, or you can spend the whole day getting your creative house in order so that you start the year on a fresh slate. It is half price for Patreons if you go over and sign up at patreon.com/Alice Fraser, which you can do for free. So that's an alluring prospect if you want. You can also buy it as a Christmas present for the creative person in your life who just needs to get their shit in order to do the thing that they want to do. That's a very nice Christmas present. Although, if you are going to buy a Christmas present this year, it doesn't have to be me. It can be any artistic, creative person. Just, can we please not buy plastic crap that will give someone 1 second of pleasure? Go out, find an artist that you enjoy or that you think they would enjoy or that you know that they enjoy. Go straight to their shop or to their Patreon or Substack and support them. It's a relatively waste-free way of doing Christmas. This is a Bugle podcast, an Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.